afternoon, or actually it's the evening, I should say. It's 8 o'clock, right? It's 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I should say, how is everybody doing this evening? How is everybody doing this evening? Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to be here with all of you. Welcome, glad you're here. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. That notifications bell is very, very important. So glad you all are here. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe post button, post this on Reddit, post this on Facebook, post this on Twitter. The more people here, the merrier. This should be a lovely conversation like we always have here. We are good at having lovely conversations. So welcome everybody. Glad you're here. The way this show works is that I give my opening remarks. Then after I give my opening remarks, after that, I do the roll call where I call you out as I see you, names and locations. And then from there, at the next point, the next thing I do is that I then answer your super chat questions. And then after that, we're done. So your super chats, keep them rolling in. The things you want me to discuss. The second half of the show is made by you. It is your questions that make the second half of the show happen. If you give me a super chat, I will give you an answer. It may not be a super answer. It may not be the answer you are looking for, but I will give you an answer if you give me a super chat. That's how we roll here. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Post this video around, get ready, opening remarks, anarchism, influence Mao, good question. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, post this video around, shoot me a super chat for the second half of the show, and we're gonna jump right into my opening remarks today. So folks, I had been planning this afternoon to do a stream, and I was going to just talk about news events. And so I'm actually sitting here in this office, right? I'm sitting here in this like conference room area at the office where I work. And I hear like some like bells, some like banging, like there's a protest going on. And so, I thought, okay, all right, maybe it was a Palestine rally or something. I look out the window, this little tiny rally against the Cuban government with a banner that says SOS Cuba. There's maybe 15 people there, maybe 20, but that's pushing it. They're escorted by an NYPD van. Really small rally. So, I figured, okay, it was about, I was going to go live at 8, and it was about 7:20. So I just figured, okay, I ran downstairs, I ran up to the rally, and I just asked them, do you support the blockade on Cuba? And they said the blockade is okay, they said the blockade is good, we don't want to end the blockade, we just want to overthrow the Communist Party. See it for yourself, it's right below, I filmed the whole thing. The video below, I filmed the whole thing. And it just tells you what these protesters are all about. They don't really want to help the Cuban people. They don't care about the Cuban people. This is about politics. They want to overthrow the Communist Party. These are anti-communists. These are Atlas Shrugged fans. These are libertarians. These are free market extremists. They don't really care about the Cubans at all, right? The U.S. government has blocked food from Cuba, blocked medicine. Anyone who's ever been there will tell you how like the Cubans struggled to get things like plastic bags because of the U.S. government. And, these folks are out there protesting, and it's all about we love the Cuban, it's about the Cuban people, and all, but you talk to them, so you want to help the Cuban people, don't you? How about that blockade? Oh, blockade is good, They said the blockade is good, right? 3 different people on there said the blockade is good. They kind of started surrounding me and yelling at me at one point. It just tells you everything you need to know about these folks. Conservatives, all right, canceling Jackie Chan. That's everything you need to know. Everything you need to know about these folks, right? The Gusano folks, they one of them, for a long time, he finally died, but there was a guy named Luis Posada Carriles. Luis Posada Carriles. And this was a guy who actually hijacked he bombed an airplane. I'm sorry, he didn't hijack, but he bombed an airplane and killed 74 Cuban school children. This guy is Osama bin Laden. This guy is, this guy killed far more people than, a lot of the terror attacks that we have. These mass shooters here in the United States, they kill what, 10, 15 people, maybe 25 people. This guy blew up a plane in Cuba with 74 people on it, a lot of them school children. He just blew up an airplane. And the U.S. government harbored him, and he was considered a hero among the Miami Cuban exiles. They thought he was a great hero. Oh, yeah, he's fighting the commies, right? Luis Posada Carriles. You can Google it, Luis Posada Carriles. This guy, he lived out his life in Miami after blowing up an airline and killing a bunch of school children. So don't think for a minute that this SOS Cuba stuff is really about helping the Cuban people. If it was, the first thing these people would have said is, yes, we have some criticisms of the Cuban government, but yeah, that blockade has got to go. No, they didn't say that. They want their people to be hungry. They want their people to starve because they don't really care about them. It's about hating the Communist Party. It's about overthrowing the Cuban government. They look at Libya, they look at Syria, they look at Iraq, they look at Afghanistan, they look at all the results of U.S. regime change. What always happens when the U.S. government overthrows one of these countries? Does things get better? No, they just don't care. They just hate the communists so much, right? And it's a vendetta, maybe some of them, revolutions are ugly things, especially when they're violent. Revolutions violent revolutions are not pleasant events. And these folks, they want their plantations back. They want their factories back. They don't like communism, and they don't really care about their own people. And they're out there saying they said to me, watch the video if you don't believe me. I got it on film just before this video. Blockade is okay, blockade is good, it's just about overthrowing the Communist Party. No, it's not about the blockade. It was amazing. Just how they just come out and say that. It's not even strategic. The German public sanity. And that just tells you everything you need to know. That tells you everything you need to know. So the main thing is we need to get that video everywhere, right? The algorithms are not going to do it for us. They're not going to do it for us. They're not going to make this video go viral. We have to make it go viral. We as a community need to get that video everywhere. We just need to post it below, go into SOS Cuba hashtag and just post it below there. Go into the Cuba Reddit forums and just post it there. We need this link to be everywhere. Let's get this video everywhere, just everywhere, so we can show the world what these, Cuba SOS activists really think. They want to starve their own people. They want to kill their own people. They don't really care about the Cuban people at all. It's about their political agenda. I didn't even actually plan to talk about this tonight, but it was, just a few minutes before the live. It's actually starting to be sundown now, so based on the good luck that they happen to be walking by my office here in Manhattan, we now can show the world what the Miami Cubans, what the SOS Cuba protesters are really about. No nuance, the blockade is bad, but no. They support the blockade. Blockade is good. Sanctions are good. They said it. You heard it for yourself. Watch the video, right? I barely had any time to edit. I took 4 different clips. I clipped myself walking. I clipped 2 things from the film. I had like 2 seconds to edit before this live, practically. And you can watch it for yourself. But the whole world needs to see this. Because I'm so tired of people thinking that they know about communism because they talk to one of these people. I'm really tired of it. I'll just be honest. I'm really, really tired of it. It's really obnoxious, right? Folks, there's a movie called Gone with the Wind. You ever see Gone with the Wind? It's a classic American movie. It's very, very racist, but it's considered to be one of the greatest American films. And it's called Gone with the Wind. And the film is all about how the southern plantation owners, they had these beautiful dances and parties, and everyone was happy during slavery. But then the Union Army came and swept away their good life. It was gone with the wind. And there's this woman named Miss Scarlet, and she says, I do declare, Captain Butler, I swear by this red earth. You watch it. It's all about how, That is one interpretation of the U.S. Civil War. That's one side of the story. And when you talk, obviously everyone else in U.S. history understands that slavery was a genocidal institution. And, the concentration camp in Angola, Louisiana, it was a plantation, but it was really like a death camp where they would work people to death. It was genocidal, right? I mean, slavery was an abomination. Millions of Africans died on the way to the United States. They brought here in chains. Half of them would die on these slave ships, worked to death, right? And even among the poor white people who lived in the South, it was awful. The poor white people, they were competing with people who worked for free, and so they were poor and miserable. Slavery was bad for everybody. It was bad for everybody. It was most especially bad for the Africans who were being worked to death and murdered and separated from their families and treated as human property, and it was genocidal and murderous. It was also bad for the poor white workers who were competing with people who worked for free and had low wages. And the only people who really benefited from slavery were the wealthy plantation owners, the ultra-rich, aristocracy plantation owners. But you watch Gone with the Wind, that is their version of events, right? That is their version of events. And according to them, everything was great. And then the evil Union Army came down and ruined everything. When you talk to a Miami Cuban, you're watching Gone with the Wind. And that's what you need to understand. When you talk to a Miami Cuban, when you talk to somebody who fled from Iran, when you talk to somebody who fled from Syria, when you talk to somebody who fled from China, when you talk to the Falun Gong or the Tibet separatists, that's who you're talking to. You're talking to Miss Scarlett. If you ask Miss Scarlett, if you ask Miss Scarlett, hey, was Abraham Lincoln a good guy? Oh, no, Abraham Lincoln was an awful man. Everything was great before he came down and took my plantation away. Oh, that's what you're hearing. That's Miami Cubans. It's Gone with the Wind. It's Miss Scarlett. It's The Birth of a Nation. It's one side of the story. And because mainstream media in the United States is run by the billionaires and bankers, and because, mainstream, education in the United States is dominated by the imperialist narrative, that's the version of events we get. Just like for many years, the version of events we heard about the U.S. Civil War was, I do declare, this is what you're hearing, right? Now, is Miss Scarlett lying? If you ask Miss Scarlett, was the Civil War awful? No, she's telling her experience. And she did have this amazing plantation, and it was taken away by the Union Army. And there were probably atrocities, there were atrocities committed by the Union Army during the Civil War. No one denies that. Sherman's march to the sea was pretty awful. But that said, was slavery good? No. Was the Union Army wrong? No. Was the South right? No. But according to Miss Scarlett, it was. It's one version of events. And when you talk to exiles, when you talk to people who fled from communist countries, this is what you're hearing. You're hearing their side of the story. We never get to hear the side of the story from the people, of those countries, right? Great example. I was on a train. I'll never forget this. I was selling a communist newspaper on a train. There was one from Romania who was on the train. I'm walking up and down the train. You want to buy a communist newspaper? Buy a communist newspaper. This woman from Romania, she says, I lived under communism. It was awful. And I said, isn't it a lot worse now? And she paused for a minute. She paused. And she said, actually, yeah, it is a lot worse now. And in fact, they've done polls in every single one of the former socialist republics of Eastern Europe. In Russia, in Estonia, in Latvia, in Lithuania, in Romania, in Czechoslovakia. They have done polls. Overwhelmingly, people say that life was better before the fall of the Soviet Union. Over and over and over again. In Poland, in Czechoslovakia, look this up. An anti-communist report on this. Mainstream media reports on this. BBC will do stories. Soviet nostalgia is at an all-time high in Russia, but they lived under it, right? Again, the people that live down the street from you in Ohio or Pennsylvania or Michigan or Florida or California, they have one side of events. But the people in the country have a very different version of events. It's not always, there are two sides to every story. There are different perspectives on events. But when you listen to Miami Cubans, when you listen to, I don't know, people who fled from the Soviet Union, the Ukrainian regime change, Euromaidan kind of people, you're hearing one side of the story. And I don't understand why that's so hard for people to get. But, look, if you're in the United States and you're just surrounded with one version of events, you might assume that that's what everybody believes. You might assume, well, everyone I've ever talked to from Cuba told me it was awful. Yes, but you're only talking to people who lost in the revolution and hated things so bad that they got on a boat and got out of there. That's the only people you're talking to. There's millions of Cubans who didn't lose the revolution, millions of Cubans who didn't get on a boat and get out of there. And they might see things differently. And they might not, right? There are differences of opinion. And everyone has criticisms of the country that they live in. Don't get me wrong, right? Don't get me wrong. All right, sources on Cuba. All right, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. There are hard things in Cuba. There are problems in Cuba. The blockade is not, the only thing there. There's issues in the government. We're not going to deny that there are issues with human rights. We're not going to deny that there are problems. But these protesters, they don't want to help the Cuban people. They admitted that on the video. So please get that video everywhere. Get that video everywhere. Let people see it, and let people see for themselves if these SOS Cuba protesters really want to help the Cuban people. Let the world see it. It's a very short video. I think it's less than 3 minutes. It's just boom, boom, boom. I just ran out there, boom, boom, boom. Luckily, with the new iPhone, you can kind of stabilize it. So boom, boom, boom. So get that video everywhere. That's the first thing I wanted to talk about. Now we can talk about the other stuff that I'd actually been planning to talk about. So today, Joe Biden gave a speech. I don't know if folks saw this. Serbian Americans, Gusan. All right. Serbian Americans, Gusanos, 1999. Thank you, Andre, for that super chat. Not a question, but Jackie Pan just announced he's going to join the seat. Yep, I've already got that on the list. Jackie Chan is already on the list, Fluffing Fluff. Thank you very much. Jackie Chan is already on the agenda for the second half of the show. Have no fear. So the other thing I wanted to talk about. So Joe Biden gave a speech today in Philadelphia. And it was weird because it's like, I swear, they shot up Joe with amphetamines before this speech. I have never seen Joe Biden have so much energy. Joe Biden comes out there and he's, man, you got to wear a mask. Come on, man. Wear a mask. Get vaccinated. It's your patriotic duty, man. Come on. This is America. No one's ever been racist here in America. Donald Trump's racist. And we don't have that in America. We don't have Ku Klux Klan people in America. This is America. We're used to tired Joe Biden who's man, but instead we got Joe Biden was pumped. I swear they rolled up his sleeves and they injected him full of meth or crystal meth or cocaine, and he came out there and he's yelling. But I listened to the speech. The main point of the speech, I'm not familiar with. Oh, I think I might be. Mike Quill. I think we'll talk about Mike Quill. All right, Mike Quill. I think I do know about that, actually. But anyway, thank you for that super chat. But so he comes out there, Joe Biden comes out there, and he's all pumped up. I've never seen Joe have so much energy, right? He comes out, and the main thrust of his speech was that he basically, around the country, in Texas, in some other states like North Carolina, I think, and some other states, Republicans are trying to pass laws that they say are aimed at restricting voter fraud. And these laws are bad laws, right? One place, they want to make it a rule that you can't give bottled water to people when they're waiting in line to vote. Why not? Right? You're not giving it to them. It's not a bribe. It's not vote a certain way or you get this bottled water. But it's in places where it's very hot, people are waiting in line and they want to drink some water. What's wrong with that? Nothing wrong with that. They want to pass a law. You have to have so many different forms of ID. These are laws intended to suppress voter turnout, right? And I'm not okay with that. I'm not cool with that. And Joe Biden's not cool with that either. So he gave this speech, thunderously condemning that. What was weird, though, it was a little weird, is that his speech began with him hammering home hammering home that he was the winner of the 2020 elections. It's July, folks. It's July. The elections were in November. Joe Biden was sworn in January. So why the hell is he still, I really won the elections. You're listening to him. It's like, Joe, you've been sworn in for a long time. The whole world recognizes you as the winner of the elections. There was some confusion. Mexico, Russia, some other countries had questions. But at this point, you won. Everyone admits you won. So it was very defensive. It was odd. Now, my position has been, I am not convinced that this was a stolen election. The 2020 election, it looks like Biden won the election. Now, there were some things that go on, and then they cancel you if you bring this up. But I've been canceled so many damn times, I don't care. There was some foul play that went on, but Joe Biden still won. That's how it looks to me. That's been my position. There was some foul play, but, overwhelmingly, Joe Biden won the election. And thank you, Andre, for the super chat. Joe Biden won the election. The foul play that went on, Nevada, they had this thing called the Native Voter Project. That's completely illegal. Basically, in Nevada, which is a state that could have gone for Trump, could have gone either way, they had this program where if you were Native American and you voted, your name got entered in a raffle for like a $200 gift card. That's illegal, right? You can't incentivize people to vote, on the basis of you might win something. On top of that, you can't incentivize people to vote on the basis of their race, okay? You can't do that. That's illegal. Imagine that I announced, I'm the governor of some area. I am going to give I'm going to have a raffle. If you're a white person and you go to vote on this day, you can't do that, right? I mean, it's one thing. You can't incentivize anybody to vote. That's illegal. Number two, you can't incentivize people of a particular race, right? So, that Native Voter Project, that was foul play. I mean, I'm sorry, but, the Nevada Native Voter Project, I did a great story on it. You can watch on my YouTube channel way back at the time of the elections. The Native Voter Project was foul play. You can't do that. But you can't disbar all these people's votes just because their name got entered in a raffle. And they did go to vote, and they did vote for Joe Biden overwhelmingly, so he still won, right? And there's other things like that. There's examples, there was the ballot harvesting thing, and all. Again, none of that. We are talking about millions of votes here, right? In order for Joe Biden to have actually stolen the election, we're not talking about, one or two, we're talking about millions and millions of people. It looks to me like it went for Biden. It went for Biden. The election, it looks to me, based on what I've seen, that Biden won the election. And when people start, that whole thing, when Rudy Giuliani was up there, and he was saying that there was a vast conspiracy by Hugo Chavez and Bolivarians and Chinese communists and voting machines. It was ridiculous. It was embarrassing. It was painful. You just wanted to slap Giuliani and just say, shut up. This is just dumb. This is like, come on. Are you really? Really, come on, right? Is it fair that say the U.S. ruling class harps on this in order to divide? Yeah, U.S. ruling class harps on voter stuff to divide. So it looked to me like Biden won the election. The thing is, though, Donald Trump did way better than anybody expected him to do in the 2020 election. That's the situation in which Trump lost. It was still very close, and Trump lost. The U.S. economy crashed and burned. There was a pandemic that, wrecked the economy. Donald Trump couldn't tell his supporters to even put a mask on during the pandemic. Every state, Donald Trump said every state is on its own. We had 50 different states had 50 different rules, right? And the economy was crashing and burning. And under those circumstances, it wowould be very hard for any president to win an election. I mean, seriously. Under those circumstances, the best politician in the world wouldn't win. And Donald Trump still came close to getting reelected in 2020. That's a little bit of an alarm bell. Donald Trump, his support among African Americans and Latinos increased in 2020. It didn't go down. He got more black folks, more Latino folks to vote for him in his run for re-election than he did the first time around. So Donald Trump did very, very well in the presidential election, but he didn't win, as far as I can tell. He didn't win, but it was very, very close when it shouldn't have been. Under those circumstances, the greatest presidents in U.S. history, like the most brilliant politicians, would have lost. So I don't think it was a stolen election, but I do think that basically, Donald Trump proved that he's a very, very, very effective politician to be able to do so well under those circumstances. And part of that is Donald Trump telling his supporters that he actually won. If Donald Trump were to admit defeat, all of his supporters would think he's a loser, right? Donald Trump never loses, right? So he has to, that's part of the thing. He has to maintain that he still won. There you go. But yeah, I mean, and we can admit, and see, this is the thing, you get canceled if you admit the Democrats did anything foul, like the Nevada voter project and the ballot harvesting. Look, Democrats played dirty, Republicans played dirty. They played dirty, and they're playing dirty now with their voter suppression stuff. They're playing dirty now, trying to keep people from voting. So both sides play dirty in American politics. Democrats and Republicans played dirty. And I'm tired of this. I'm really tired of this. It seemed like right after the election, every liberal I knew had to go around saying that voter fraud never happens. And it's like, no, voter fraud happens, okay? In every election, there's some degree of fraud. It usually doesn't affect the results, but every election ever, there's somebody, in New York City, a few people got arrested for trying to vote in the place of dead people. That happened in New York City, right? Now, does that prove that our elections are rigged? No, it proves somebody was trying to play foul, and it was probably related to local politics, probably had nothing to do with the national election. But it happens, right? And, it's just, let's be real. I think Biden is the legit winner of the election. But I also think, Democrats fought dirty, Republicans fought dirty. And in this instance, it seems like the Democratic candidate had the backing of most of the political establishment. Not all, right? Betsy DeVos, Bernie Marcus, the fracking companies, Sheldon Adelson, folks like that were backing Trump. That's true, but it seems to me like that Trump had the minority of support, right? The big companies, Silicon Valley, the big oil companies, Walmart. They had a whole convention where it turned into an anti-Trump. The Walmart shareholders meeting turned into this anti-Trump rally practically. I saw the head of Walmart giving the fist salute in the Wall Street Journal, and my head wanted to explode. The majority of the ruling class wanted Trump out, and they got him out. Now, they seem to have gotten him out within the rules of U.S. elections. I don't think there was enough foul play to have changed the rules, but that's what happened, and I don't understand why there's this policing of the left. Why am I not allowed to say this, right? I'm telling you that I think Biden is the legit winner of the election, but there was foul play, and we should be allowed to say that. We should be allowed to say that, and I don't like this atmosphere where we're not allowed to say that. But anyhow, so the main thing is that during this speech, Biden is talking about, so I don't know if people have followed this. So in Texas, they're trying to pass some voter suppression laws. But in order to pass them, they have to have a quorum. There have to be enough legislators in the state legislature. There have to be enough, state elected officials to vote on this law. And it's going to pass because Texas is a majority Republican state. So the Democrats in Texas have fled the state. So they can't be there, and there can't be a quorum. So they're basically bringing politics in Texas to a halt in order to stop these voter laws from being passed. That's what's going on in Texas. The Texas governor is furious about it. He's up in arms. He doesn't want it to happen. He's very, very angry about it. Meanwhile, this is becoming kind of the new woke cause for the Democrats, and it's a right cause. It's a righteous cause. Look, voter suppression, you never look good. If you say, I hope few people vote, you never look good with that. You never look good saying, I hope fewer people turn out to vote. You don't look good that way. I mean, I'm sorry, but it is kind of, if you're a person who believes in popular power and public will, you should want there to be maximum participation. And you should offer an agenda and a political program that would appeal to a maximum amount of people. If you're sitting there saying, I hope people don't vote so I can win, you should look yourself in the mirror and say, I've got a little bit of a problem there. Maybe I should change my agenda so that I hope more people vote because what I believe in is popular. And the fact that Republicans, for years it's been like this. This is not a new thing. Republicans have long had this idea that somehow they want to decrease voter turnout. That's a bad thing. And I will say that the United States does a lot to decrease voter turnout. Okay? First things first, almost every other country in the world has their election on a weekend and a national holiday. We have our elections on a weekday, and it is not a national holiday. It's always a Tuesday, and it's a working day. It's not a national holiday. Now, some places, like I know if it's a union job, they can arrange for you to get election day off. The unions often are able to bring that. But every other country in the world, countries that are far more, quote unquote, authoritarian than the United States, they have an election. It's on a weekend when most people are off work anyway. Plus, it's a national holiday. And it's neither in the United States. In the United States, it's a regular working day. So if you got to get to work, there's a long line at the voting booth. Forget about voting before work. Big long line after work. And that has the effect of decreasing voter turnout. And it tends to decrease voter turnout in areas where the population is more densely populated, in areas where the population is more densely concentrated, right? If in Cleveland, I was from Ohio, and in Cleveland, there'd be big lines around the block to vote, right? In Cleveland, you have more African-American folks, you have more low-income folks and all of that. But, I grew up in a rural area, a small town. You had low-income folks out there too, but it was a small town. It was very conservative. And, we never had big lines. Never were there big lines to vote in my little town in Ohio. It wasn't densely populated, right? It wasn't a densely populated area. My high school graduating class was 115 people. So we never had big lines. That affects the turnout, and especially if you have the election on a Tuesday, and especially if you have the election not as a national holiday. There you go. But there are other things. For example, the Electoral College. The Electoral College. The way we pick the president in the United States is not democratic, really, right? If you are a Republican in my state of New York, your vote doesn't count. In the national presidential election, forget it, because this is a Democratic state. New York City is a stronghold of the Democratic Party, and the folks in upstate New York are furious about this. There's a lot of Republicans in upstate New York, and they hate this. They're furious about it. For years, they've been furious because New York City is this huge metropolitan concentration of the population. They can vote. They could vote for Republicans all day long, but at the end of the day, New York City is going to cancel them out. So New York's electoral votes are going to go to the Democrats. And folks in Austin, Texas, and Houston, Texas, are also furious because they're Democrats. Austin, that's a Democratic stronghold. Houston, that's a Democratic stronghold. But Texas is overwhelmingly a Republican state. And so if you live in the Democrats in Houston, the Democrats in Austin, their votes don't really matter. Their vote, it's like, they can vote Democrat all day long. No one cares because Texas's electoral votes are going to go to the folks. David. They're going to go to the Republicans. Another thing, okay, and this is just classic, okay? So in the United States, right, only U.S. states get to vote, and Washington, D.C. gets like one symbolic electoral vote or something like that. It doesn't mean anything. Only U.S. states plus Washington, D.C. get to vote in the elections. Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory, and, doesn't matter. Puerto Ricans have no say in who becomes the president. None. Zero. They don't have any senators, they don't have any congressmen, and they don't have any electoral votes. The U.S. Virgin Islands have absolutely no say in who becomes president of the United States. None whatsoever. No congressmen, no senators, and no electoral votes. Guam. There's a whole island called Guam. There's a lot of people who live in Guam, but they have zero say in who becomes president of the United States. Zero congressmen, zero electoral votes, zero senators. Right? American Samoa. Right? There's a lot of people who live there. Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard of Florida of Hawaii, she was born there. Doesn't matter. If you're from American Samoa, you live there, you get zero say. Now, people say, well, that's just our system, Caleb. That's just our system, right? That's just how our system works. It's not a state. Oh, okay. Now, imagine for a minute, just imagine for a minute that Russia, that Vladimir Putin said, Siberia, they don't get to vote in the presidential election. They're not a state. They're not a republic. Imagine that Putin said that. Do you think that an international media would go, oh, that's just the Russian system. Oh, boy, that's just how it works. Imagine that China was having an election and they said, you know what, Tibet? Yeah, they don't, no Tibet in this election. I mean, give me a break. Imagine Venezuela was having an election and there was like a province of Venezuela. And they said, this area, it's not like a full Venezuelan province, so we're not going to let them participate. They don't get any seats in the parliament. We would never stand for this. We would never stand for this, right? Right? Puerto Ricans pay taxes. American Samoans pay taxes, right? Residents of Guam pay taxes. I don't know what that means, Days of War. I don't know what that means, but yeah, I mean, these folks pay taxes. They are affected by U.S. laws and U.S. policies, but they have no say in who becomes the president. They have no representation in the federal legislature. But somehow, and again, we turn a blind eye to this as Americans. We just go, well, that's our system, right? You read the Constitution, only states get it. Well, yeah, if it was another country, we would lose our shit over this. But it's just the all right, Cuban athletes defect. All right, wrote it down. That's our system. That's our system. So there you go. So it's just something to keep in mind. Like I said, there are two sides to every story. Things are usually a lot more complicated than you think. SOS Cuba protesters don't really care about Cuba. The voter thing that Joe Biden was talking about, got me a lot to say. And on that note, I don't have a big, long speech, tonight. It's not the, big epic monologue or something. So on that note, I think we'll do our roll call, and then I'll start answering your super chats, and then we'll all go home and have a good sleep. So roll call, names and locations. I'll call you out as I see you, names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Australia, Oz Whistles is the first name that I saw. Welcome, Mr. Oz Whistles. Belize, Joey. Tristan from Maryland. Parents' house in New Hampshire, Leipzig, East Germany. Kieran from... Whoa. All right, got to slow it down here. Kieran from sunny Toronto. John Rutherford in Texas. Cleveland Pirate Alex. Nashville, Tennessee. Wisconsin. Texas. Suez, Texas. Steve in Southwest Michigan. KCMO. Kansas City, Missouri. Welcome. Norway. It's my way or Norway. All right, Brad in St. Louis. Corona, California. Space Communist, good friend of the show. Joey out in New Jersey, good friend of the program, good friend of the work that we're doing. Clydebank, James Graham, Auckland, New Zealand. Ryan in Oakland, California. Ryan's great. Mohsin from Iran, Rogue Valley, Jeff Studio City, California, Rogue Valley, Oregon, Luca Madison, Wisconsin, Tony, Tasmania, Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati, Ohio, Calgary, Canada, California, Arthur Porter out in Phoenix. Shout out to you, Arthur. Great cover designer. He designed the cover of my new book, and he's great. Craig in Carson City, Nevada. Comrade Pella in Retail Hell. He's fighting the good fight for, Comrade Pella's fighting the good fight for tour guides. Check out that video. Richie out in Staten Island. Howdy, Mo in Pomona, California. JT24 out in Mississippi. Vancouver, Canada. West Virginia, Redneck Red. Vinicius in Brazil. Chris in the woodlands of Texas. Andres from Norway, Atlanta, baby. Oh, give me something under the tree. Is that how that song goes? No, I don't think it is. All right, Sweden, Eddie from Texas, Denver, Colorado. Dylan is in Computer Network. But are you also in reality, or are you just a cyber in your existence? All right, Mikey in Billings, Montana. Randy from Detroit. Springfield from Springfield, Missouri. Camel Spider Attack. That is a wild name you got there, Camel Spider Attack. Sounds terrifying. Is that the spiders come at you and the camels come at you and you just duck for cover? That would be awful. Awful stuff. Pasadena, California. John in Houston, Riverside, California. Joshua Tree, Kinky, is with us. Shout out to you. Jason Sarna in Vallejo, California, good friend of the program. Los Angeles. Peter Coffin is in an undisclosed location. Well, stay safe, Peter. Stay safe. I hope you're safe out there in your undisclosed location. Johnson County, North Carolina. Matt from Florida. Balthazar in Oakland. Mo in Toronto, Canada. Adelaide, Australia. Steve in Maryland. Martin in Ireland. Around the Ohio River. Very good. Hi-ho, the boatmen go, floating down the river in the Ohio. Yeah, it's a great song. Look up that song, the Boatman's Dance, right, about the Ohio River. That's a great song. Madrid, Spain. Hawaii, right? Wow. Somehow my video is 5 minutes behind. I don't know where that is, Nadia, but there you go. London Calling. Reading, Pennsylvania, Oakland, California, Detroit, Michigan, Solidarity, Pella, bring back the guides. That's right, we support our community here, right? I mean, it's a righteous cause. Even if I didn't know a single tour guide, I would be angry about the fact that the New York City tour bus companies have replaced the guides with audio recordings. But the fact that they did it to a good guy like Comrade Pella, great guy who I've known for years, goes back to Occupy Wall Street, the fact that they would do it to him makes it personal. Tour guide companies, you better bring back those guides. Hashtag bring back the guides. No, audio recordings on tour buses don't work. It puts the public in danger, right? Those tour guides, they warn people about the branches they warn people about the low-hanging branches and telephone poles on those tour buses. When there's traffic, they keep the audience entertained, right? You can't have audio recordings on a tour bus. That's just an abomination. I mean, it's awful. They got to bring back the guides right now. I am totally with Comrade Pella, and I hope that our whole community is. I hope we're all tweeting out, bring back the guides, because it's so wrong what they're doing. CL in Atlanta, Georgia, Minnesota, Texans, Dylan Small says the Bread Tube Serves Imperialism book is amazingly well done. Well, there you go. I'm glad you really liked it. North New Jersey, Danny from Illinois, David Fox, good friend of the program out in Bendigo, Australia, Logan in Utah, so great. Wow. Texas, Cincinnati, Ohio, Newton Grove, North Carolina. That's a new one. I've never heard of Newton Grove, but there you go. Cheap imitation riff-off. That's right. Parasocialite. Cincinnati gang. There you go. Tamara and Dario from Brooklyn. Good friends of the program. They're always on here. They're great. Thank you very much. There you go. All right. Anybody else? Anybody else? Any other names and locations before we start answering our super chat questions? Any other names and locations for us tonight? Anyone else? I see Cincinnati is very well represented, so that's good. Any other names and locations before we... Ohio gang, Pirate Alex. West Virginia, welcome. CE Perfect. Washington State, Philip Blair is with us. Very good. Very good. All right. Cincinnati. Wow. All right. Okay, folks. First, and keep the super chats rolling in, by the way. Keep them rolling in, right? Because I will answer your questions. The length of this second half of the show all depends on how many super chats you all send me. So if you want me to keep talking, by all means, shoot me a super chat. First super chat question comes from Chaya, and she asked about the influence of anarchism on Mao Zedong. How was Mao Zedong influenced by anarchism? I would argue that Mao was very heavily influenced by anarchism, and that the influence of anarchism, and thank you, ALQK, thank you for the super chat. I would argue that the influence of anarchism on Mao is very vast, and that the Chinese Communist Party downplays this for good reasons, right? Because they, especially during the Cold War, they wanted to play up that they were the most pure in their Marxist-Leninist ideology. So they made a point of not playing up Mao's anarchist background and how it might have influenced him. But now we are in the 21st century. The Cold War is over. You think the U.S. is going to go all the way in Cuba? Go all the way in Cuba. First of all, you have to remember that at the time that Mao, was coming up, right, when, the 19 teens, when Mao was getting into anarchism, when he had an anarchist organization that he actually led called the New People's Study Group. At that time, the main difference between communists, Marxists, and anarchists was not, do you want a state or do you support socialist countries? There were no socialist countries at that time. The main difference between communists and anarchists was, did you think the revolution would come from the factory worker, which was the Marxist narrative, right? It's the workers and the bosses, the proletarians and the bourgeoisie. Or did you think it would be the peasantry who would lead the revolution? Peter Kropotkin, the Narodniks, they were called, the Friends of the People, or the Narodniks, or the left the Socialist Revolutionary Party in Russia, the Social Revolutionary Party, the Narodniks, the Friends of the People. Their position was it would be the peasantry who would make the revolution. And if you read the book The Conquest of Bread by Peter Kropotkin, the focus of the anarchist current in Russia and in Spain and in China was that it would be the peasants who would make the revolution. Marxism focused on industrial workers, the factory owner versus the factory worker, but it was the anarchists who focused on the peasant rebellion and the struggle of the peasant against the landlord. And it was the struggle of the peasant against the landlord that ultimately made the Chinese Revolution. So the fact that Mao would be heavily influenced by Peter Kropotkin, who spent his whole life writing about the struggle of the peasant against the landlord, shouldn't be surprising. About 30 years before Mao was born, there was an event that was deeply influential in Mao's life, and that was called the Taiping Uprising. It was called the Taiping Uprising. 30 years before Mao was born, there was a peasant uprising all throughout China, and it swept the whole country. And what it was is there was this Chinese man, and he had met some Christian missionaries, and they had given him a Chinese translated pamphlet explaining Christianity. And the guy read it and came to the conclusion. He said, "Wow, this makes perfect sense. And I'm Jesus's younger brother, obviously sent to do. I'm like Jesus's younger brother, and I'm sent to earth to bring the kingdom of heaven on earth." And so this guy, he formed the Taiping army, and they launched, and they had an uprising. And all over China, peasants rose up against their landlords, rallying around this guy who claimed he was Jesus's younger brother, brought to create heaven on earth by having the peasants rise up against their landlords. It was the Taiping Uprising. It was a civil war that spread through China. Millions of people died. It was a big war that happened. Mao was very heavily influenced by the Taiping Uprising, so much so that in Tiananmen Square, which is a big important part of Beijing, he actually built a monument to the Taiping Uprising, right? This peasant uprising that was not Marxist at all. It was a Christian utopian uprising among peasants, and Mao was heavily influenced by this uprising. The other thing, though, about Mao, I won't just say it was the agrarian thing, because Peter Kropotkin and the anarchists were all about agrarians and the peasants versus the landlords and all of that. There was another aspect of anarchism that was heavily influencing Mao, and that was that Mao was very much I don't know, there's got to be a word for this. Mao was a young person's person, right? Mao was all about teenagers. Mao was all about teenage rebellion. That is like a streak that runs through Mao's life. Mao's entire life, he is obsessed with teenage rebellion, okay? If you read Red Star Over China, which is Edgar Snow, who interviewed Mao, Mao talks about how when he was a teenager, his father was a brutal authoritarian who used to beat him and beat his sister and beat his mom, and how that's what made him a communist. And Mao, before he became a communist revolutionary, he was a high school principal. And in fact, the first article that Mao ever published was about physical education and why it's really important to include exercises and group exercising in education. That it adds something, that phys ed, basically gym class, is really important. But in China, it wasn't that, right? Before school, they would all exercise and do jumping jacks and exercises before school. The very first essay that Mao ever had published, before he was a communist, Mao writes an essay about how in high school, it's really important to have exercising. In the 1930s, when Mao is in the countryside, who is he mainly recruiting to join his army? Teenagers. It's mainly teenagers, right? And he's recruiting teenagers to join his army. And then later, when Mao is a really old man, the Cultural Revolution, how his uprising in the party, which I think was not good. I don't think the Cultural Revolution was good, but it was mainly about mobilizing teenagers, Red Guards. Mao, for some reason, he was really into that adolescent rebellion, which, nowadays we kind of laugh it off, like adolescent rebellion, right? That's the teenager, I will not clean my room, mom and dad. Well, in China, it's very different, okay? We're talking about a very, very authoritarian, patriarchal society, right? Where the obligation to one's family is very, very extreme. And we're talking about like 100 years ago. So this is a very different circumstance, okay? But, there's a very traditional, strict Chinese culture where the obligation, to be a filial son, they talk about filial piety, is very extreme. For some reason, Mao very much was into tapping into adolescent rebellion. And he himself was apparently, according to the interviews he gave to Edgar Snow, was motivated by adolescent rebellion. He built an army of teenage runaways, basically. Oh, you don't like your parents, they're authoritarian, well, come join our new Red Army. And so he builds an army of adolescent rebels, basically. And then in the 60s, he launches the Cultural Revolution, which is a mass explosion of teenagers going around beating people up for not being pure communists. So, and as we all know, anyone who's ever encountered an anarchist will tell you that anarchism as an ideology is also very much influenced by adolescent rebellion. So Mao, he was all about the countryside, and at that time anarchists were, and he was all about adolescent rebellion, and that's a long-standing theme in anarchism. That is the anarchist influence on Mao. I would argue that Mao was a Marxist-Leninist. He understood Marxism-Leninism, but he had a unique formula to apply it to Chinese society. He knew that China was largely a peasant country at the time, and that the revolution would come from the countryside. He knew that, even though that was not the communist line. The communist line was that it would be factory workers, and the communist line basically, was saying, Stalin was saying, you just have to join the KMT because the revolution's not going to happen. Well, Mao had the brilliance to move into the countryside. And Mao also understood the psychology of teenagers and the psychology of adolescent rebellion, and made that a very key point of his revolutionary movement and his propaganda. He knew how to work with teenagers and how to recruit teenagers and how to rebel. And in China at that time, peasants and their anger at the landlords and teenagers and their anger at their parents, that was the powder keg. And Mao was so well in touch with his own people that he had his finger to the ground. He knew how it would work in China. And that is what a communist should be. Communism isn't LARPing. Mao didn't put on Russian hats and say, oh, I'm going to be a communist, I'm going to pretend to be in the Soviet Union. No, Mao knew his own people, the Chinese people, well enough to figure out the formula that would work in China. And Mao's communism was very, very effective in China because Mao very much understood that was how it would work. And there were many instances where Mao went against the Communist International, went against Stalin, went against the Soviet, position because he knew what would work in China. And that needs to be pointed out. When the Communist International dissolved in 1942, Mao actually said it was a good thing. He said, we haven't been listening to them in the past 5 or 6 years. We do our own thing here in China. We don't need the Communist International to tell us what to do. And, Mao understood that China was going to make a revolution in its own way. And that was the genius of Mao Zedong. Now, not everything about Mao is necessarily good. Like that Cultural Revolution was awful. It was an awful thing. I mean, anyone who ever lived through the Cultural Revolution will tell you it was a nightmare. Even the staunchest communists, the biggest supporters of communism will tell you that the Cultural Revolution was bad. It was a nightmare. And there are other things about Mao that aren't good. In the final years of his life, he was supporting Pinochet and being friendly with Nixon. And, Mao was problematic in some ways, right? In the final period when the Gang of Four was running things, he was kind of an opportunist and he was collaborating with the imperialists. But he did start the process of China, reviving and becoming a great country, a great power. And he did win a socialist revolution. And he did change millions of people's lives. I mean, the amount of change changes that Mao brought to China. He started China on the road to becoming the most powerful country in the world. I mean, what Mao did is unprecedented. Mao is going to be remembered, on the level of a Julius Caesar, or on the level of of Alexander the Great. I mean, Mao is going to be remembered as one of the most important human beings in world history because of the impact he had. That said, was he all good? No, Mao had his problems. He's a fascinating individual, though. And if you get the Center for Political Innovation handbook, or the manual, the educational manual, it's called We Are City Builders. We have 2 Mao essays in there that are very important that I think you should check out. So there you go. That's Mao and the influence on Mao. So they're canceling Jackie Chan because he's joining the Chinese Communist Party. Well, I what do you want me to say? I mean, why? I mean, you look at what the Chinese Communist Party has done for China. What China was before the Chinese Communist Party, what China is now. You look at how many millions of people have been raised out of poverty. You look at how much the living standards have gone up. Should we be shocked that Jackie Chan might think that's a good thing and might, think that maybe he ought to join the party? I'm not shocked by that at all. But again, in our perspective, if you just buy the narrative that everything associated with China is just pure evil, well, there you go. Okay. When did the German public get their sanity and drop the Third Reich? Well, that's a good question, right? Because I'm obviously not in the minds of every German person, but there was this big thing called World War II. After World War II, there was a huge effort to basically, denazify the country. And there was a lot of revelations about the horrendous things the Nazis did, like the Holocaust. And, I think in the 50s, by the mid-50s, there was pretty much no, except for fringe elements, there was no support for the Nazis by the mid-50s, I would say. But let's talk about this, because if you really want to understand the Nazis, you really need to read this very important book called Hitler's Banker, and it's a biography of Hjalmar Schacht, because again, economics, folks, economics. Okay, Marxism is about economics, and the economic base is how you understand things. And I've read World War II stuff. I've read biographies of Hitler. I did not understand Nazism and fascism until I read Hitler's Banker, the biography of Hjalmar Schacht. Okay, here's the thing, and this you will get it once you read this book. Okay, so all right, after World War I, Germany was an imperialist country. It's stripped of its colonies. It's forced to pay reparations to France and Britain and other countries that won the war. And it's economically having problems. There's mass hunger in the streets and starvation and such. And, in a way, though, Germany is a very progressive place. This is, again, in the 1920s, Germany was probably the only place in the world that had a gay rights movement. There was no gay rights movement in America in the 30s. There was no gay rights movement in Britain in the 30s. But in the 20s and early 30s, before the Nazis, there was a gay rights movement in Germany. There were gay bars. There was an entire institute dedicated to studying LGBT sexuality. Germany was a very progressive place, and it had been the home to the biggest Marxist party in the world was the Social Democratic Party. That's the party that Marx and Engels built, the German Social Democratic Party. So, it was a very progressive place. They lost World War I. They're paying reparations. And there's a couple factors, okay? So on the one hand, there's a big communist movement that's fighting for socialism, and they want Germany to become a socialist country like the Soviet Union. And then on top of that, you have the Social Democrats, the reformists, who think that Germany can just sort of one step at a time move towards socialism. And that's like the labor movement, a strong labor unions, strong left. But then you also there's a lot of German imperialists, right? There's a banker named Hjalmar Schacht Hjalmar Schacht. His full name was Hjalmar Horace Greeley Schacht, and he was just this German financier, and he was a German banker. Then there's the Krupps, right? A wealthy, huge, wealthy monopolist family. There's the Tysons, right? The Tysons, they're very, very, very wealthy. There's a number of big German capitalists who've been stripped. They used to have businesses all over Africa and businesses in China. They've been stripped of all of that. So they're kind of bitter about that, right? And then on top of that, you have the Americans and the British that are kind of dominating the German economy and putting those German capitalists under threat. So there's multiple struggles going on. On the one hand, there's the struggle between the German workers and the German capitalists, right? And that's the Communist Party. They're fighting against the German capitalists. But then on top of that, there's the struggle between the German capitalists, who used to be imperialists but lost all their colonies. They want to be imperialists again. And the British and American imperialists, who are dominating them and won't let them have an army and want to make sure they don't become a competitor again. So basically, what happened was that the threat of communist revolution was rising, right? The German workers were revolting. In May of 1928, there was what they called Blut May, or Bloody May, where a group of communists, revolted, and there was a number of people killed. It was a communist uprising that happened. Communists, they have millions of people that are joining them. So with the threat of communist revolution, the German capitalists say, okay, right? Okay, with Britain and France and America are more afraid of a communist revolution. They're more afraid of a communist revolution than they are investing. Than they are of Germany gaining some independence. So this gives us an opportunity. And Schacht and Krupp and Tyson, they found Hitler to be their man. And they said, okay, we're going to have Hitler seize control of the government. And with Hitler, we can regain our independence. We can regain our colonies. We can regain control of our own economy with Hitler. And we'll use the threat of communist revolution to make the Americans and the British accept this. Right? Now, Hitler had already been getting some covert support from the British. The British were very afraid of Germany aligning with the Soviet Union. If there was a communist revolution in Germany, that would basically result in British imperialism losing control of the European mainland. If Germany and the Soviet Union were together as communists, then pretty soon the European mainland would all be communist. And they knew this. So the British had already been giving guns and weapons and financial support to Hitler. Okay? They'd been giving him support because Hitler's supporters, the brown shirts, went around killing communists. And that was mainly what the Nazis were. They were this crazy, fanatical street fighting group that went around murdering communists. And that's what they did. And the British were covertly supporting them because, hey, they're killing communists and the last thing they ever want. But, in the late 20s, Hitler started to realize that, I can be more than just a street fighting guy. I can lead more than just my street fighting cult. I could actually, become the leader of the country. So Hitler sits down with Krupp and Tyson and Hjalmar Schacht. He sits down with them and he says, look, I've been working for the British, but actually I could probably work for you guys if you'll let me be the leader. And so the Nazi Party, they had a fight in the Nazi Party. There was some purges and some splits and whatever. And so then eventually, Hitler suddenly gets the support of a lot of wealthy German capitalists. And then when Hitler takes power, Hitler immediately, and first of all, Jordan Peterson is a liar, okay? There's a video, I swear, where Jordan Peterson in his video, he says, Hitler got a huge majority. Never had someone gotten a huge majority in the elections. That's not true. Hitler never won a majority in the elections. And Hitler did not. That didn't happen. The only reason Hitler was appointed chancellor was because he joined an alliance with the centrist right-wing party. That did not happen. He did not get a huge majority. That was false, right? But Jordan Peterson, well, he said it, and he knows all about the lobsters. I mean, the fact that he can say that, never had such a huge majority, that's a lie. It's just a lie. It's just a big fat lie, but it feeds Jordan Peterson's very dark human beings are naturally evil message, right? That's what Jordan Peterson wants the viewers to think. It's like if you watch his videos, it's like human beings, you're more evil than you realized. Human beings are more evil. Like that's Jordan Peterson. He's got this like contempt for humanity that underlies things. There's this video where he sits there saying that Hitler got a huge majority. He didn't, right? So Hitler's getting support, and suddenly, the Nazi Party is transitioning from being just this crazy street fighting group to actually being a group that would run the country. There's an election, and there's a coalition government. There's a coalition, that between Hitler and the right-wing party, and they appointed Hitler the chancellor, which they didn't have to do. You'd think it'd be the more centrist person that would be appointed chancellor. He's the chancellor. And then once Hitler was appointed chancellor, at that point, then you had the Reichstag fire, where under very suspicious circumstances, the German Parliament building, the Reichstag, caught on fire. They blamed the communists for it, and on that basis, they rounded up and arrested all the communist members of the Parliament. They lost their seats in the Parliament, and so by default, their seats went to Nazis. And on that basis, then you had the Nazi government. And then they unleashed the street fighting, the street fighting group, the stormtroopers, or the SA, the brown shirts. They were made an official government body. They were like officially declared to be like a wing of the government, right? So they were no longer a bunch of street thugs. They were suddenly given badges. They were a legal thing. And once they were legal, they could just go around and start killing people and murdering people. They set up a concentration camp system for communists, and they rounded up all the communist and social democratic leaders, all the leaders of the unions, put them in concentration camps. And then Hitler sat down with Hjalmar Schacht, and Hjalmar Schacht implemented some very dramatic economic moves. Number one is they restarted war production, right? They created the world's first military-industrial complex. They built these highways across Germany called the Autobahns, and they hired a bunch of people to build these highways. Plus, a whole bunch of workers were rounded up and put in these prison camps. And a whole bunch of people got jobs being guards in these prison camps. Plus, all the people in the prison camps weren't out looking for jobs. Plus, and if you put a bunch of people in prison camps, you restart military spending really dramatically. They had no military spending before, but when Hitler ripped up the Versailles Treaty, suddenly they had military spending again. And then, on top of that, you build a bunch of highways, right? All of a sudden, the government takes that dramatic moves where you have a prison industrial complex, you have a military industrial complex, and then you're prepping up for war. Huge amounts of government spending are suddenly pouring in. The result is the economy surges, for about 2-3 years, right? All of this government money is going into the economy to build tanks and drones and bombs and all kinds of stuff. All this government money is going into the economy to build a network of prison camps and concentration camps. Plus all this government money is going into the economy to hire people to build these roads across the country. And for 2 or 3 years, suddenly the economy goes from 0 to like 100%. Like the economy is very good. And so all of a sudden, people that were like kind of starving, suddenly the economy is good. And then you hit them with heavy indoctrination, right? My life was miserable. Now my life is doing better. And now we've got all kinds of flashy propaganda to convince you, that things are better, and that was how they won over the loyalty of the population. And that's how they created a totalitarian state. Right? It was a process, right? It was through mass destruction, preparing for war, putting a huge chunk of the population in prison camps and using their slave labor. It was awful and it was horrendous, but that's how they managed to stimulate the economy. But it only worked for a few years. It only worked. By about 1938 or 1939, the German economy is starting to fall apart again because this was an artificial stimulus, right? It was an artificial stimulus, right? It didn't really work. And by 1938, 1939, they're starting to invade countries and take things over for the simple reason that they need to have a war because that their economy is centered around building tanks and bombs and weapons, and that's all they've got. And that's really in the essence of this is the fascist Bonapartism. That's what Hitler really was. So you're asking me, when did people stop believing in it? As World War II was over, as the country was in ruins, as people, came to terms with, what was happening with the Holocaust and the horrendous, mass murders and gas chambers the Nazis had committed, when the whole world was looking at the German people in horror, when it was pretty clear that economic surge for the first 2 or 3 years that had been the basis of popular support for the Nazis, had been phony. It didn't really work. After all of that, now, even, and people say that in Germany, like the AfD, right, the Alternative for Germany Party, people say they're neo-Nazis. No. They are right-wingers. They're like Trumpers, kind of. They're not Nazis. They're not Nazis. There are Nazis in Germany. There's something called like the National Democratic Party or something. They're very fringe. They're a very, very, very fringe element. But no, the AfD, they're the new right. They're Trumpers. They're like Nigel Farage in Britain. They're conservatives. They're anti-immigrant and stuff. But they're not admirers of Hitler, right? In Germany, with all the history that's gone on there, to be an admirer of Hitler requires, a very, 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 very extreme level of denying reality and such. But there are such people in Germany, and they're not allowed to publicly speak in their own name, and there's all kinds of rules against them doing what they did. But there's, they're fringe. They're fringe. And most people that are in the AfD are just right-wing, and most of them are like libertarians. They're like libertarian right-wing dudes who hate Muslims and think Israel's amazing and hate immigrants and love capitalism. That's your typical AfD. They're the new right. It's the new right of Europe. It's the kind of people that vote for Trump over here. Most people who vote for Donald Trump are not Nazis, right? Now, there are, Nazi elements out there, Richard Spencer, people like that, but most people who vote for Trump are not Nazis. The overwhelming majority of people in the German AfD are not Nazis. They're just right-wingers, right? And, they're wrong. They're wrong. I don't support the AfD. I have had the honor of meeting various people from Die Linke, which is a socialist party in Germany. It's kind of a broad front, like socialist party in Germany. Die Linke, it means the left. They're pretty cool. But there you go. Enough about that. All right. Okay. All right. Good sources on Cuba. Well, first of all, right? Right? When you're arguing with people, you generally want to cite sources that are very hard for them to claim are biased. So when I'm arguing with people about Cuba, I tend to cite the CIA World Factbook, which is a very good source. It just has the life expectancy, infant mortality rate, stuff like that. I tend to cite the U.S. Library of Congress country study. Again, that's just the U.S. Library of Congress. They have a country study on every country in the world, published in the 80s. You just go down the line, right? I tend to cite mainstream newspapers like The Guardian or the New York Times. That's when you're arguing with people. You want to find statements that are made. It's almost like, in law, there's a concept called a statement against interest. I don't know if you've ever heard this. A statement against interest. Meaning, if you say something and it goes against your position, it has more value in a court of law. It's called a statement against interest. So when I'm arguing with people, I do that. Now, when you're trying to just learn about Cuba, right? If you just want to learn about Cuba, you're not trying to win a debate with somebody and citing data. You just want to learn. A very good book. A very, very good book. It's called Children of the Revolution. And it was written by the leading educational scholar in the United States. And his name is escaping me, but he's the guy who wrote The Shame of a Nation, Jonathan Kozol, I think. He wrote The Shame of a Nation, and he is the leading scholar on education in the United States. And you probably read him. I think Jonathan Kozol, right? You probably read him if you went to college. You read his writing on American education. If you studied teaching or anything like that, you definitely read Jonathan Kozol. Well, this guy wrote a book in the 70s about the Cuban educational system. And it's an amazing book. An amazing book called Children of the Revolution. And he went to Cuba and he studied the Cuban school system. And it is a beautiful book. And this doesn't, again, this is not from, the Marxist Leninist. No, this is from like the leading educational scholar in the United States wrote this glowing book about Cuba's educational system, Children of the Revolution. Another great source on Cuba, there's a guy named Harry Targ. I don't know if you ever heard of Harry Targ. But he wrote a very good book after it was kind of after the it was in the 90s. He wrote a book called Cuba and the USA: A New World Order, and it kind of gives an economic history of the Cuban Revolution, and it kind of gives an overview of Cuba. That's very good. There's another very good book that's put out by an economist. It's a history of the Cuban economy. It's called The Economic Transformation of Cuba. It was published by Monthly Review magazine. I can't remember who the author of that is. It might be Paul Sweezy. That book is very good. The Economic Transformation of Cuba. And it describes how Cuba moved towards socialism in great detail, a lot of statistics, a lot of data. The Economic Transformation of Cuba. So there you go. Those are all good sources on Cuba. But like I said, when you're arguing with people, you want to cite data that they're not gonna be critical of. But yeah, Jonathan Kozol's book, Harry Targ and his writings, The Economic Transformation of Cuba, published by Monthly Review. These are all very good sources. They're all very, very good sources. I will say, and this isn't like a source you could cite in an argument, Fidel Castro's like autobiography, like My Life, is very good. Very good. It's not an autobiography in the sense that he sat down and wrote it. It's a journalist interviewed Fidel. And it's about his life. And it's just an interview that Fidel did. And it's huge. It's over 1,000 pages. But it's very readable. And it's just interviews with Fidel Castro about his life. And he talks about his childhood. He talks about the revolution. He talks about Che Guevara. He talks about... It's fascinating. If you get a copy of My Life by Fidel Castro, I mean, it's My Life. It's like interview with Fidel Castro. It's amazing. It's a great book. I recommend that. Before Fidel Castro died, he sat down with a journalist, and they just did this long interview thing. It's a great book. I would check that out. Okay, next question. There's another good book called Cuba Looks to the Year 2000. And that is about the special period and the hardships in Cuba. It talks about the Cuban punk rock and rap movement. In the 90s, there was a Cuban hip-hop and punk rock movement among the young people. A lot of the younger folks got into hip-hop and punk rock. And then the U.S. government tried to make that into an anti-government thing. And it wasn't. They were just into punk rock and rap and stuff like that. And there's a book, Cuba Looks to the Year 2000, that is very good. And it talks about what Cuba was like in the 90s, the hardship that they had in the 90s. It's very, very good. And I would recommend that if you can read Cuba Looks to the Year 2000. I learned a lot about Cuba in that book as well. So there you go. I think I've given you a pretty good Cuba bibliography there as well. Now, the person, Andre, said Serbian Americans acted like gusanos in 1999. Well, it's interesting because, I lived in Cleveland, and, I actually was surprised how many Serbians that I met in Cleveland who were actually, they would say things like that the bombing was wrong, that Milosevic was misunderstood. I was kind of surprised. Among most ethnic groups in Cleveland from Eastern Europe, you would meet mainly people that were just fanatical anti-communists. But I was surprised. I went to college in Cleveland, and it was a lot of folks from the suburbs of Cleveland who were, Eastern European, and Serbian Americans, oddly, a number of them would say good things about Milosevic. I was kind of impressed. I didn't, Ukrainians all hate the Soviet Union. Hungarians are all very anti-communist. I mean, it's a broad statement, but for some reason, Serbian Americans tended to speak positively of Milosevic, tended to say that the bombing by Clinton was unjustified. And there were a lot of demonstrations against the bombing of former Yugoslavia by Clinton from Serbian Americans, actually. It's actually kind of interesting. It may have something to do with the fact that the USA had been friendly with Tito, and that Tito had been, it may have something to do with that. But yeah, for some reason, there were a number of Serbian Americans that I met who were right-wing, conservative, anti-communist, but they They said the bombing was wrong. They didn't buy the Kosovo Liberation Army narrative, and actually my experience was generally that they were not this way. Now it's important. Another thing though that's important. I'll never forget this. I won't say the name of the university. I remember when I was a high school student. I went to a summer camp at this university. It's a Quaker university. And it was to get college credit, and I got college credit in peace studies, right? And I remember it was in peace studies, and it was just like my parents wanted me out of the house, so it was a summer program this college had. I was between my junior and senior year of high school, and I went and I studied peace studies at this university. And I will never forget that they showed us a movie all about Otpor. Now, what is Otpor? Otpor was the CIA-funded, anarchist group in Serbia that the CIA and George Soros used to overthrow Milosevic. And they showed us this documentary. It was called Bringing Down a Dictator. And it was all about how this is what we should do. Instead of having wars, we'll fund, grassroots movements of the people to topple anti-imperialist states. And that was largely what the peace studies program was about. It was like, rather than have wars, we can all just become regime change activists for U.S. imperialism. And I didn't know anywhere near what I know now. I mean, I was a high school student, but even then, something didn't sit right with me about that. I remember sitting there in the peace studies class, and they show us, bringing down a dictator, all about Otpor, this anarchist group. They're symbols of fist, and they want freedom from evil Milosevic. And I remember thinking, something ain't right about this. But there you go. Mike Quill. Now, Comrade Pella, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, okay? But is the Mike Quill that started the Transit Workers Union in New York City the same Mike Quill who wrote The Big Strike, the book about the 1934, Teamster, or the 1934 strike in San Francisco? He wrote The Big Strike. Is this the same Mike Quill who was kind of the socialist poet? Is this the same one? Because I'm familiar with Mike Quill in that sense, that he was known as kind of a socialist writer who was involved in labor activism and such, and he wrote The Big Strike. Is this the same guy? I think it's the same guy. Yes, it is the same guy. Good, I was right. The name sounded familiar to me. Mike Quill, Mike Quill was kind of a communist writer and poet and such, and I will never forget, he wrote a poem that went like this, and it was to glorify the unemployment movement, and it's kind of beautiful, and it gives you the spirit of the 1930s. He said, "There was an old woman who lived in a shoe. She had so many children, she didn't know what to do. So she gave them red banners and taught them to yell, and they went down to City Hall and raised bloody hell." I thought that was brilliant. That's Mike Quill. That was one of his most beloved poems. It's beautiful, right? There was an old woman who lived in a shoe, had so many children, she didn't know what to do. So she gave them red banners and taught them to yell, and they went down to City Hall and raised bloody hell. And that was the 1930s, right? That was the unemployment councils and the hunger marches and the rent strikes. And you look at what the Communist Party did during the 1930s and how they fought for working people. And there were so many people that were desperately poor and hungry, and the communists said to them, "Don't starve, fight. Don't starve, fight." That was their slogan. Don't starve, fight. So there you go. Next question. All right. The person is asking, is the U.S. ruling class harping on the voter stuff to divide the workers? Well, no, I wouldn't put it that way. This is legitimate, right? Look, if you're trying to decrease voter turnout, that's not cool. And if you're specifically targeting certain demographics to decrease voter turnout, that's not cool. I will say that there is an emotional edge to this, right? For the black community that suffered under Jim Crow and was prevented from registering to vote, and how people were murdered for registering black people to vote, it certainly touches an emotional nerve, absolutely does. And And, but at the same time, no, I don't think this is a plot to divide the workers. Look, I think this is Republicans want to hold on to power in some states, and Democrats have the upper hand for the first time. They didn't always have the upper hand. It used to be the mainstream of the establishment was with Bush and the neocons and stuff, but this is a new Republican Party. This is the Republican Party in the era of Trump. Most of the, Bush war supporting people are now Democrats, right? Bill Kristol, all the neocons are now, lining up. So this is a new battlefield, and the Republicans don't have the upper hand. So it's a different story. Using the enemy's weapons against them, should all the best be to have be as wealthy as possible. Imagine having thousands of communist billionaires. All right, weapons against them. Communist billionaires. All right, I'll address that. Thank you for the super chat. All right, next question. I don't know what David Harbour's comments were. So I just don't know what they were. I don't know who David Harbour is. I don't know his comments, so I can't really comment that. Why do Cuban athletes have to defect to play professional sports? For the simple reason that Cuba is barricaded and surrounded and unable to have their own sports league, right? And the fact that American baseball teams are not allowed to have a relationship with Cuban baseball teams. I'm sorry, but it's like you want to make it sound like, well, Cuba is so evil. They don't set up a baseball league. And so these Cuban baseball players must flee because Fidel Castro sat there on his throne and said, I don't want these people to be able to be professional athletes. No. If there was no blockade and Cuban baseball, teams could have a relationship with American baseball, there would be a relationship there. This is because of the fact that U.S. imperialism has taken Cuba and barricaded it. You cannot do business with them. This is what people don't get, okay? So if I'm in Germany, okay? Imagine I'm in Germany and I want to start importing, cupcakes to America, okay? I want to start importing cupcakes. I'm making my own cupcakes, and I want to import them to America. In order to get them through U.S. Customs, I must sign a document that says that there is not 1 ounce of Cuban sugar in those cupcakes. That's how insane the blockade is. So yeah, if an American, sports team were to start going to Cuba, that would be a huge violation of the law. So the issue there is the blockade. That's the issue. Okay. All right. Is the USA going to go all the way in Cuba? I don't think so. I think this is a test run. Cuba has changed a lot in recent decades. The person who is the president is not in any way related to Fidel Castro. There's economic reforms going on. They're trying to see how far they can push this. This is a test run. That's what I think is going on. They're trying to see who's who does what. That's what this is. And honestly, it's a good test run for us. This couldn't have come at a better time. I just wrote a book. Called Bread Tube Serves Imperialism. And now all the bread tube voices are supporting an imperialist coup. It's a test run for us. AOC has not said a word. AOC has not said a word about it, right? All the bread tubers are supporting it. DSA wrote this very carefully worded statement. Just saying, folks. It's the test run for the imperialists. They want to see how much trouble they can make, how much support they have on the ground there, etc. And it's a test run for us. We can see where these people stand. Right? I wrote a book called Bread Tube Serves Imperialism. Look at Twitter. They're all supporting imperialism. All right. Next super chat question. Someone says they want a government of action bumper sticker. Yeah, I would like to get a lot of merch. Maybe someone can show me how to do the merch thing, because I would like to have more merch available. I just don't know how to do it, but I'll figure it out. You can let me know. Maybe someone can give me a hint about how I get the merch stuff going, because I would like to get it going. All righty. Investing. I can't invest because I'm a journalist, because I'm in the press, right? If I were to invest, then I could report the news in a way that would affect my my own stocks, right? You can't do that. If you're in the media, you can't if you're in the media and you report on economic issues, you can't have, stock. You can't invest. All right. Use their own weapons against them, communist billionaires. Not exactly. I wouldn't put it that way. But I've often tried to turn the anti-communist arguments on their head, right? People think communists want everyone to be poor, and they like capitalism because it makes them rich. Well, actually, we want a world of vast material abundance, right? The goal of socialism is to raise material abundance. That's why I wrote a whole book, Getting Rich Without Capitalism, right? I often will urge people to talk about these, regime change activists and stuff, So, I've referred to them as terrorists, right? And I said, imagine that people were murdering police and stuff over here. You got to learn to turn the right-wing arguments on their head. There's an art to that. Why doesn't Russia or China step up to aid Russia? That must be a mistype, Kinky. I think you're asking about another country, because what do you mean? Why doesn't Russia or China step up to aid what? Oh, Cuba. Well, I think they do. No, Russia and China are aiding Cuba. They are. And I mean, they are aiding Cuba. They definitely are. I mean, Cuba has spoken, Russia and China have both spoken up that they don't support U.S. provocations. And yes, they are aiding Cuba. They are. They have provided a lot of aid to Cuba. They are absolutely doing so. All right, folks. Well, that's the show for tonight. I got to get home, and we've all got things to do. But hopefully I'll be back tomorrow. I think I'll try to do this again tomorrow. We'll see how the day goes. But I need to do more of these, so I'm going to try to do this again tomorrow. So we'll end this way. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers are continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. Fusion City now. Fusion City now. And don't forget to share the video of the right-wing Cubans calling for a blockade against their own people. The link is below. Get that video everywhere. Show the world what they're all about. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. Good night.